Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO. And we're so pleased to have you here with us for the latest installment of our Yiddish Civilization Lecture Series. This is a part of our YIVO Bard Uriel Weinreich Yiddish Summer Program, which is 6 weeks of instruction in the Yiddish language, literature, and culture. And we do this series of lectures Tuesdays in English, Thursdays in Yiddish, which are both a part of the instruction for our students, but also a way for us to share the wonderful Yiddish language, literature, and culture learning that happens at YIVO each summer with the broader public. So today we have our talk is called You Had Buried Me, and I've Come Back: Manipulation, Lies, and the Archives of the Cinematic Dybbuk, for which we are very happy to have the scholar Zehvit Stern. Zehvit Stern is a scholar of Yiddish theater, film, literature, and folklore, and of Hebrew literature. She holds an MA in Yiddish culture from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a PhD in Jewish studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and the Graduate Theological Union. She has taught at the University of Oxford, at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, the Hebrew University, and Tel Aviv University, and is currently academic dean, head of honors program, and assistant professor of theater studies at Emunah Academic College of Arts and Education. She has published and lectured extensively on Eastern European Jewish culture. Among her publications are The Maternal Drag, Motherhood as Performance in Yiddish Film Melodrama, In Choosing Yiddish, New Frontiers of Language and Culture, and on Dubbing the Dead, the Dybbuk 1937 to 1917-1937, in TDR, the Drama Review. Her forthcoming book, titled The Birth of Theater from the Spirit of Folk Performance, Eastern European Jewish Culture, and the Invention of a National Dramatic Heritage, examines the emergence of the narrative that views the Purimspiel and other formerly rejected folkish expressions as the origins of Jewish theater. Zehvit, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Okay, so I'm truly delighted to be here and to take part in this distinguished Yiddish Civilization lecture series. YIVO has long been one of my favorite institutions, if not the favorite institution. And although we're meeting virtually, I'm thrilled to join you today on Zoom. And I see that it allows people from all over the world to be here, which is truly exciting. I'd like to warmly thank the organizers, Alex, Julia, David, for the invitation. And of course, thank you all for being here. Okay, so I'll share the screen now. Okay. So many years ago, back in 2008, I gave a talk at Yiddish, in person and in Yiddish, titled Ghosts on the Silver Screen, the Dybbuk 1937 as a Realm of Memory. In that lecture, I proposed that Yiddish cinema in general, and the haunting 1937 film The Dybbuk in particular, function as what Pierre Nora calls a lieu de mémoire, a site of memory, that is a symbolic space of commemoration, a kind of cultural Kaddish, if you will. In that talk and in the article that followed, published in Modern Jewish Experience in World Cinema, that's my contribution, and also published in Hebrew, I offered a critical perspective on this commemorative function. I cautioned against the tendency to flatten the film's rich historical complexities into what I described as one flat image of a world on the brink of annihilation. Today's talk is a direct continuation and in some way a confirmation of the argument I made in that earlier lecture and article. It takes the form of a case study that further develops my thesis, a remarkable Polish-German documentary from 2017 titled The Prince and the Dybbuk. This film, and by extension my talk today, centers on the enigmatic figure of Michał Waszyński, the director of the renowned 1937 Yiddish film Der Dybbuk, probably known to many of you, and if not the film, then perhaps the play. Waszyński, who died in Rome in 1965, was summoned from the dead by filmmakers Elvira Niewiera and Piotr Wasowski, and the documentary strives to explore and, as we'll see, solve his layered and elusive life story. What follows is first a narrative of how my scholarly research on Waszyński gradually evolved into a kind of detective inquiry. In the second part of the talk, I connect my findings to broader questions about Eastern European Jewish civilization, with particular attention to the entangled themes of possession and dispossession, identity, racial, ethnic, sexual, and difference. How do we bury our Eastern European heroes, and how do we bring them back to life? Who controls the acts of remembering, commemorating, and resurrecting a lost Yiddish culture? The famous line from Ansky's play, "You had buried me and I've come back, ihr hat mich mekaber gewen und ich hab mich umgekehrt," spoken of course by Chonen the Dybbuk himself, might well serve as a guiding motto for our investigation today. Okay, so part one, the investigation, in quest for Waszyński's diary. So, in August 2018, a humble documentary film festival held at the National Library of Israel. In that humble festival, I was excited to come across a then new German-Polish documentary titled The Prince and the Dybbuk, a poster here in German. Having previously written on the Cinematic Dybbuk, and having read Samuel Blumenfeld's fascinating biography of Michał Waszyński, the director, in French, L'homme qui voulait être prince. It hasn't been translated into English, but it has been translated into Polish, and that plays a role, but we'll come to that later. So, having read Blumenfeld's biography, I knew all too well that Waszyński's life offered ideal material for a film. This was a man born into a poor Jewish family in the shtetl of Kovel, Volhynia, now in Ukraine, who left home as a young man and reinvented himself in Warsaw, becoming one of Poland's most prolific and celebrated film directors. Here you can see him as a film director. With the Nazi occupation, he fled eastward, eventually joining the Polish armed forces and making his way to Italy. After the war, he remained there, living in extraordinary splendor among Catholic aristocrats and film stars. You may recognize the woman at the center, and went on to help produce some of Hollywood's grandest historical epics of the 50s and 60s, including the fall of the Roman Empire, filmed on an enormous set near Madrid. In short, a shtetl Jew, a Polish film celebrity, and a Catholic Roman aristocrat, all embodied in a single figure, often described as a kind of human chameleon. Indeed, the enigmatic Waszyński brings to mind Woody Allen's fictional protagonist Zelig from the 1983 film, a man who can shift his appearance and identity to blend in seamlessly wherever he goes. Okay, so back to the film. Directed and written by Piotr Wasowski and Elvira Niewiera, this ambitious documentary film, which won Best Documentary on Cinema at the 2017 Venice Film Festival, draws on an exceptionally rich blend of sources. These include archival footage, pre-war home movies shot in Poland, stock images, interviews with scholars and acquaintances, so talking heads, and importantly, clips from films that Waszyński either directed or helped produce. At the heart of it all is the film referenced in the documentary's title, The Dybbuk, his most famous work and enduring legacy. Okay, so let's begin now by watching the film's striking opening sequence, fitting for our haunted and haunting topic and echoing our guiding motto, "You had buried me and I've come back." The documentary opens with Waszyński's grand funeral in Rome, 1965, followed by the visit to his grave. So, let's opening.
Principe Michał Waszyński, un nobile polacco in esilio e artista di merito per l'industria del film italiano, è stato qui sepolto. Egli era il realizzatore dei più grandi prodotti di Hollywood di tutti i tempi.
Wait, sorry, you missed let's watch it from the beginning. It was cut. Let's just watch again.
Vicino alle tombe di famosi cardinali italiani e nobili famiglie aristocratiche, ebbe luogo la settimana scorsa sul cimitero di Campoverano a Roma un funerale degno di nota. Il principe Michał Waszyński, un nobile polacco in esilio e artista di merito per l'industria del film italiano, è stato qui sepolto. Egli era il realizzatore dei più grandi prodotti.
Okay, so just to give you a sense of what the film is like and how it opens. Okay, so The Prince and the Dybbuk is not a fly-on-the-wall documentary, nor does it rely on a single authoritative narrator. Instead, the story unfolds through a carefully composed montage of diverse sources, such as the film, the contemporary clip you've just seen. Its evocative editing weaves together multiple voices, languages, you could hear Italian, of course, perspectives, and enigmatic sounds and images. Yet one element stands out above all: excerpts from Waszyński's diaries, read aloud in Yiddish over haunting, often ambiguous visuals, historical and fictional alike. Judging by reviews I've read, even viewers with no prior knowledge of Waszyński or Yiddish or the Dybbuk found these diary passages deeply affecting, moving, unsettling, and at times even shocking. So let's watch another clip where we find that's actually the first diary entry.
Mein Stott wird Nelem, wie ich wollt keinmal nicht gehad kein Ort von mein Jugend. Nur von dir wär ich nicht Potter. Die hast mir weiter gewähnt auf uns. Gott, die kommst noch alles zurück zu mir in Herzen als Stoch jede Nacht. In meine Geleimis und euch, wenn ich bin wach. Boeierst tief bis in den Noh von mein Ich. Wie ein Schild fließt du herum mir.
Okay, by the way, does anyone recognize the voice? Okay, that will be a riddle for later. I thought maybe the audience at Evo would recognize, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so as soon as I encountered these striking diary entries, I set out to locate the diary itself, but quickly hit a dead end. There was no trace of it in any library or archive, including YIVO, in print or manuscript form, not even in Blumenfeld's biography. So that you can see the cover on the right hand, which had clearly served as both inspiration and roadmap for the filmmakers, as the nearly identical titles suggest. So The Man Who Wanted to Be Prince and The Prince and the Dybbuk. Of course, the film director knew better than Blumenfeld, because they knew you had to have the word Dybbuk in your title, not just Prince. But yeah, okay. So I reached out to both directors, but received no reply, and I couldn't find the diaries nowhere. So all these details stirred doubts in my mind, doubts that only deepened upon re-watching the film a second and third time. Now questions began to surface. Why, for instance, would Waszyński, who left the shtetl and his Jewish upbringing at the age of 16, choose to write, presumably much later in life, diaries in Yiddish, a language which he had long distanced himself from? As both the film and Blumenfeld's biography note, and as Jim Haberman had already pointed out in Bridge of Light, his foundational source book on Yiddish cinema, Waszyński required translators on the set of the Dybbuk to communicate with the Yiddish-speaking actors. While it's clear that he only feigned incomprehension, it seems likely that he felt uneasy speaking the language he had left behind over 2 decades earlier, let alone writing in it. This discomfort is hardly surprising given Yiddish status as a primarily as a spoken vernacular. As you all know, its speakers often turn to other languages, Polish, Russian, German, Hebrew, for writing. I've delved into the Polish language discussions surrounding the film, and I found that I wasn't alone in my skepticism. Indeed, in the fall of 2018, Midrash, a Polish monthly Midrash, sorry, in Polish it would be Midrash, a Polish monthly devoted to Jewish culture, which sadly ceased publication in 2018, but in 19, but in 18 it was still being published, featured an in-depth interview with the film's producer Małgorzata Zacharko. Rozmowa Midrash with Małgorzata Zacharko. So now let's read a few excerpts together. The translation is mine, and so are the emphasis. Okay, so there are 2 Małgorzata. One is the Małgorzata Kozera-Tupińska, who asked questions to Małgorzata Zacharko, who's the producer. Okay. So Kozera-Tupińska, are these his authentic diaries? And Zacharko, well, it would be too easy to make a film about him if there were diaries in which he would directly write about himself. There are no Waszyński's diaries. However, there are notes of which, in all probability, he is the author. They are mentioned in Samuel Blumenfeld's book. These notes, at least some of them, were found in the house where Waszyński's set designer from the Madrid period, John Drake Moore, lived and worked. There's now a small museum there. The secretary showed that Vera and Piotr Round showed them the correspondence between Moore and Waszyński. And between these letters were notes in several different languages, including Yiddish. The directors decided that all of the notes dug up there and from other sources will be read in Yiddish in the film, because this language was closest to the spirit of the hero's character. So as you can see in this rather apologetic explanation, the producer concedes quite a lot. There are no actual diaries, but there are the notes embedded in letters, not in Yiddish, at least not entirely in Yiddish, in different languages. We don't know which. In the following paragraph, Kozera-Tupińska presses her even further. So, in fact, she asks, the texts read in the film were written for the purpose of reduction based on these notes. And Zacharko answers, These texts are taken from these notes, but a few sentences from the Dybbuk has also been added. And everything is read in Yiddish, although originally it was different. There were sentences in the notes that led us to understand why the Dybbuk was so close to Waszyński. Therefore, the directors decided to use a few more sentences from the film that corresponded with his story, developing these threads. Okay, so while Polish friends and colleagues, film scholars I consulted, tended to take these claims at face value, I remained unconvinced. The producer's seemingly candid confession, still struck me as evasive. My correspondence with fellow Yiddishist Janina Wurst, whose name I spotted in the film credits, only deepened my skepticism. As it turns out, she was the one who translated the so-called diary entries. You could see on the screen, it's in German, right? But they have the word diary entries, Ausgabe. Yeah. Anyway, and surprise, surprise, they weren't translated from Polish or Italian, the languages Waszyński actually spoke and wrote in, but from German, a language far more familiar to the filmmakers themselves, who had been living, they're Poles, but they had been living in Berlin for years prior to making the film. Finally, my suspicions were echoed by Samuel Blumenfeld, who remarked in a Zoom conversation, I had a long interview with him, quite simply, if they had such precious archival findings, they would have shown them on the screen. A plain observation, but a compelling one, especially so given how meticulously the film examines and displays other materials, letters, certificates, photographs, each magnified, lingered over, analyzed by multiple witnesses and experts. For example, here this is the film frame showing a letter scrutinized by a graphologist in the film, and this is his handwriting, but of course he's writing here in Italian. Some of you may be able to read the word zio, uncle Waszyński. Yeah. Okay, so now we come to our second part, the truth behind the lies. So now what? As one mockumentary director once joked, what are they going to do? Put me in cinema jail? No, I'm not proposing that, although this investigation does raise some real ethical questions. More importantly, perhaps, it prompts us to ask, why did the filmmakers go to such lengths? What does this creative choice reveal, not only about them, but about us, about our generation, our cultural moment, and the ways we imagine Eastern European Jewish history, and how we think about identity, racial, ethnic, religious, or sexual, in an era shaped by both longing and reinvention, archive fever, to quote Jacques Derrida, and fake news. There are clearly practical motives behind this crime. The diaries entries, 6 of them are scattered throughout the film, serves as the crucial thread stitching together its many disparate patches. In the dizzying parade of distant places, languages, eras, and shifting identities, and lies, because Waszyński himself was quite a liar, and without an all-knowing narrator to guide us, the film's protagonist himself steps forward to help us. Though described by many as lonely, reserved, enigmatic, as you can see in the image in front of you, and despite his famously elusive nature, the long-deceased Waszyński opens his heart to us in beautiful, poetic Yiddish. So these diary entries perform a remarkable act of revival. They bring to life Waszyński, the shtetl Jew, who passed away more than 50 years ago, along with his lost mother tongue and his brutally shattered culture, symbolized most powerfully by the Dybbuk, perhaps the culture's most iconic emblem. So this magical thread grants the filmmakers immense power. As remarkable as Waszyński's life story already is, they present a hidden truth that feels even more tragic, magnificent, profound. Niewiera and Ossowski guide us carefully through the dense force of Waszyński's enigmatic existence, positioning themselves as the hidden interpreters who unveil an inner layer of deeper psychological, spiritual, ethical significance, and of course, Heimish in Yiddish, one that the diaries seemingly authenticate and make palpably real. All of this read aloud in the velvety voice of none other than singer Daniel Kahn, our own Yiddish YouTube star whose rendition of Leonard Cohen, Hallelujah, maybe some of you have watched it, had garnered over 2.6 million views as of today. So great Hamish Yiddish goes well with this image of Waszyński. The process of deciphering promises to be all the more rewarding by offering both a concrete and symbolic key to Waszyński's complex puzzle. I would suggest that the Dybbuk functions much like the iconic Rosebud from Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. So Rosebud in Citizen Kane, just like the Dybbuk for Waszyński. Incidentally, by the way, the two filmmakers actually met, as you can see in this photo of Waszyński with Welles on the set of Welles' Othello. Lovely memory. When pieced together, the diary entries reveal not only a man haunted by his forsaken culture, language, and survivor's guilt, but also by his first love, a yeshiva student whom he met in his youth. This mirrors the unfulfilled love story of two yeshiva boys in Ansky's play, who promised to marry their children to one another. And I'll show you one more clip to show you how they make this homosexual, this love story between two men, how it works in the film entries. So one more film clip, and that would be the last one. It's the last also diary entry in the film.
Ich hab gehofft, dass die wirst verlassen, die Yeshiva mit mir in einem. Aber die bist geblieben wie vergliedert, denn sich gemacht wie es artig nicht. Wie wenn eine Liebe zwischen Männern wird bei Emes gewesen, meistens sollten.
Yeah. So through this lens, the filmmakers reconstruct Waszyński's identity not only as a shtetl Jew, but also as a homosexual yearning for both his lost culture and his vanished lover, both brutally destroyed by the Nazis and both symbolized by the Dybbuk. While this concrete interpretation may feel somewhat forced, even pushing boundaries, the very notion of the Dybbuk as a haunting presence from the past resonates deeply with many of us. We share the conviction that the past cannot simply be erased, that the dead may hold more power than the living. We inhabit a world of specters and fragments, living in what Derrida called an era of hauntology. And when it comes to the lost Yiddish culture, our fascination with Dybbuks remains especially strong. While the filmmakers draw on the suggestive echoes of ontology, they also take an anti-Derridian turn. Since the 1980s, Derrida's deconstruction has challenged notions of identity as fixed, whole, coherent. Yet, in telling the story of a human chameleon, the filmmakers settle on a closed historical narrative grounded in the idea of a solid, unchanging identity, or at least the core of identity. They seem to endorse the anti-Semitic, philo-Semitic, you tell me, notion that once a shtetl Jew, always a shtetl Jew. Invoking the film's own imagery, the Jewish identity, fate, and complexities inevitably haunt anyone who tries to escape them, much like a dybbuk. While the metaphor of the return of the repressed is undeniably compelling, both personally and culturally, and Yiviera and Ossowski are hardly the first to employ the dybbuk in this way, it ultimately works against the idea of boundary crossing, liminality, gender, and cultural fluidity so central to Ansky's work and to the lives of both Ansky and Waszyński. As the subtitle of Ansky's play reminds us, this is a story between two worlds, zwischen zwei Welten. You can see that the Dybbuk is actually the subtitle. Zwischen zwei Welten is actually the title. This is from the original, one of the, it's a Yiddish print of the play. As many of us know, gender was famously declared as performance in Judith Butler's influential Gender Trouble 1990. Race and nationality, too, are often regarded cultural constructs rather than essential truths. Yet, when it comes to the inner life, we often hold fast to the idea of identity, be it sexual, social, or ethnic. In so doing, we may unconsciously reject the very possibility of transformation. We might, for instance, cling to the notion that Yiddish remains the language closest to one's heart. I quote Zahorska, yes, even when that heart has long since moved elsewhere. Perhaps it's not only the filmmakers, but many of us who, consciously or not, resist the idea that one can truly leave the past behind and begin a new, authentic, even complete life elsewhere. While most people may not have chosen or simply were unable to distance themselves from their ethnic, racial, cultural background, others did choose to do so. And that choice, too, deserves to be acknowledged. And this is the last part. It's very short and a few final words. So about possession and dispossession. So finally, I'd like to suggest that Waszyński's life is indeed a story of possession, but not solely in the spectral Dybbuk-like sense the filmmaker proposed, as someone haunted by a buried past. I'm thinking instead of possession in the sense of ownership, and its painful counterpart, dispossession. As a poor Jew from a remote shtetl, Waszyński experienced dispossession long before the Nazi genocide of land, language, culture, and belonging. His life became a determined quest for possession of beauty, status, wealth, glamour, noble titles, success. He wanted everything. As his biographer Samuel Blumenfeld put it, he was the man who wanted to be friends. Yet when we, captivated by the romantic image of the Dybbuk, that powerful cultural metaphor I began with, insist on reading his life as one of eternal haunting, we risk dispossessing Waszyński once again. We risk denying him the life he chose to create, a life shaped by disguise, reinvention, deliberate erasure, lies. A life not of return, but of transformation. Waszyński was a man in a state of dispossession, certainly, but also in a lifelong, unapologetic, and bewildering search for possession on his own terms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating talk. There's so much I'm curious about. And I just want to take a moment to tell the audience that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function so that we can ask them. We have some good time for Q&A here. So maybe to start, could you tell us a little bit more about like Waszyński's just biography? Like, I understand this, this juxtaposition, the idea that he started off, as a Yiddish-speaking Jew in the shtetl, and grew quite distant from that and became a prince, in fact. And I want to know how that happened. If you could share a little bit more about that. But yeah, can you just and the film is kind of like obscuring that trajectory and kind of showing him as the essence of where he came from. But could you just tell us a little bit more about his biography, his true biography, and how we can compare?
So actually, it is obscure, but this is not the filmmaker's fault. This part is obscure. It's a gap that we have in his life. I read Samuel Blumenfeld's biography. He did a great job, and actually, that's what drove them to make the film. It's important that the only language this was translated to was Polish, because after it's a long story, but someone read the Polish translation of the book, and that is how, and thought this must be a film, and then this person went to the filmmakers, and then so it threw Blumenfeld. But Blumenfeld himself, who did all the archival work and the laid the grant for the film, and he's actually angry with them because they give them this little credit. You can hardly find his name. And of course the title is similar, etc. But he couldn't find anything. So there's a gap. We actually don't know where we kind of, he was probably named Moshe Vax, probably. We know what shtetl he's from, and we don't know. And then he reappears in Warsaw as Michał Waszyński, the Polish film director. He makes a ton of B movies that were really, really successful in Poland. So he was well known, not as a Jew, really as a Polish film director in Poland, in interwar Poland. And the Dybbuk is the only time he did anything that was related to Yiddish, to Judaism, to anything. And when I read Samuel Blumenfeld, it was interesting to me to see that I think it's part of Blumenfeld's own take on Jewish identity. He's the film reviewer for Le Monde, so he's also like a person of the great world, definitely, but also like has this Jewish heart. So in the biography, it's like, what does it mean that Waszyński, the man who was never really saw himself as a Jew, maybe converted, changed his name, left his culture, language, but how come we only remember him today as the director of the Dybbuk? But what happened in between, we know. So he was approached in the 1936, 7, when they said it's quite a, already in the 20s, the Dybbuk was a great success in terms of the play. People heard about it. So, and it took them a long time to get the rights and the right people to do it. But they approached Waszyński because they knew he was Jewish, but he was this great known Polish director, and that's how he was chosen to direct the film. So he was chosen by the producers. It wasn't his own initiative. And yeah, and we don't know almost anything about his youth. So
That's so interesting. And so perhaps it was a real get for the producers working on the film to get him, and it wasn't necessarily the trajectory of his entire career to return to his roots in this way. So it's particularly ironic to have him remembered, especially for this film, and in this kind of essentializing way in this documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably. But I think I want to emphasize that, and I hope I managed to convey it in my talk. In a sense, I'm angry with the filmmakers. There are a lot of things they did, and I can talk. They're not just what I showed, but much more like cuts and other examples. There, a lot of things disturb me about this film. But I also believe truly that the question of, if the shtetl Jews is always a shtetl Jew, if he can be, if he was longing for his past, what he was truly, his true self was, I don't think they're the only one who ask it. I think all of us ask it in different ways. Maybe I'll show you. I'll just share like one more.
Sure.
Yeah, one more. There's the last one. Yeah, this is the one last image I wanted to show you. So this is to show you that it's not just about the filmmakers, it's us. We all ask ourselves who Waszyński really was. So this is, if you go on Waszyński, there's an entry, Michał Waszyński, in different languages, but only in the Hebrew and Wikipedia, I mean, and only in the Hebrew Wikipedia can you find this photo. It's okay, so this is taken from the Wikipedia Hebrew entry of Waszyński. And you can find this image, this is a screenshot, and it says here 1937. This is at the entrance of the Cinema Express, Mickiewicz Street in Kovel. So the the shtetl that he came from. So it says here the grand people, the Negidim, the Grois, the Balebosim of Nichbedei Yehudei Ha'ir of Kovel with Waszyński, and they say he is the person here, that he came to his town to a family visit. But the year is 37, so presumably, and this is from the person who gave it is from there's like a land organization of Kovel,
Landsmannschaft.
yeah, Landmannschaft, yeah, in Israel. So so they put this, and and it looks like fact. But then, I looked at this photo and I showed it also to Blumenfeld, who didn't know that. And he looked at this, and we both like, he says, "Well, this is not Waszyński. See, this is someone else." And I think, to me, this is like part of like the craving we all have to, like, it's such a nice story, like this shtetl Jew. He left the shtetl, but yet he comes back in 37 because he does make finally Yiddish film, and it is shown in the cinema at his hometown, and they give him this great kuved, this great honor. We want to believe that it's Waszyński, but it's probably not him. So yeah.
I was thinking also when you mentioned that I had suspected that it was Daniel Kahn in those voiceovers, and it is a kind of interesting comparison to think about the famous Daniel Kahn translation of Hallelujah, because in a way, I'll pose it as a question: is that translation sort of a similar kind of thing, actually, as what happens in this film? That you have the kind of imagination of a Yiddish original for something that is actually in another language, that in fact the act of doing it Judaizes it, returns it to a kind of Yiddish context that actually wasn't, or takes it to a context that it wasn't its original context, but under the guise or the seeming guise of that being as if it was original.
I totally, totally agree with you. I actually gave a talk also on that because I once, like 2 years ago, I went to this conference on Yiddish linguistics, and I'm not a linguist, so I looked for something to analyze and still participate. And these were actually the two places, and in this particular talk, I analyzed the words themselves in both Hallelujah, Daniel Kahn's, he didn't, and Mendy Kahn and whoever worked in this, the translation of Hallelujah, and the diary entries, and I found even the language itself is so similar because it's so poetic.
Yes, yes, yeah.
High register. It's
Yeah.
really the Yiddish as we would have liked it to be, and also showing everybody how rich and suggestive it is. It's not just der Langmir,
Yeah.
this and that, or on all the
Absolutely, yeah.
curses. Yeah. So definitely, I see it as this new world that we're creating, imagining.
Michael Feldman in the chat says, does this say something about our need for a coherent narrative or story as Jews, Eastern Europeans, or simply as human beings? I mean, this is sort of everything that you've been saying. Their motivation's not purely cynical. They're trying to do something that, I guess, like, if you could make a positive argument for it, what would it be?
A positive. Well, again, first of all, I think as a film, it works well. It's a nice way to, it's you enjoy watching the film, and it's this trick that works really well. Instead of having this, voiceover narrative that I'm the researcher, we suddenly have Waszyński himself leading us. So it works. First of all, it works. And second of all, I don't really know what they found in the archive. But if anything, probably not in Yiddish. Positive argument. Again, my argument is that we identify, I think we all do, with this, like, we want to know more. There must be like a Yiddish echo of his previous life. It's not that I think there were no echoes. And I also feel it's hard, especially if it's a Holocaust survivor. It really is hard to believe that he could just leave everything behind and yet, and become a Roman Catholic. I know I know there's another interesting Israeli documentary. I know the filmmaker. Her name is Yael Reuveni. She also works in Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a film also recent called Goodbye, Peter Herr Schwarz. And this is her uncle who, once he came out of a camp in Germany, he was originally from Poland, I think. He just married a local German woman and stayed there, just next to the same shtetl where, not shtetl, the town in Germany where the camp was. And he had a family in Israel and everything. And he became a German. He married this German woman, and he wasn't in touch with his family. So it's really hard for the filmmaker to reconcile with that. But there were people like that.
Before we started, you said you had some more stories or observations on the film. Do you want to share? We have a few minutes.
I have some. There are some secrets involved that are with Waszyński. There are more and more secrets I didn't even start telling. I mean, there are also like money issues. Like he was running this Samuel Bronston's huge empire. With the fall of the Roman Empire, it was also the fall of the Bronston Empire, and he disappeared a minute before they went bankrupt. So it's really, and maybe there were some, I don't know, yeah, if he was always honest also in that term, and how much of Bronston's fall was also his fault, and how much money went into his own pockets. That's like one side of it. And another is the fact we know that he was gay. He wasn't, people who knew him in Rome, and that people knew, even though he was maybe married to a countess, but they knew he liked men. That's not a secret. But in the film, they interview his family. He was this uncle. We saw this Zio. He was a godfather for these Roman Catholic Italian family, and they interview them, and also Blumenfeld interviews them, and and the relation. He was like like grandfather, not grandfather, godfather to them. They are interviewed, but only when I talked to Blumenfeld, he explained to me that the relationship of Waszyński to this family was that he was their father's lover. And I'm not sure I don't know if they knew it. He was there. And Blumenfeld explained to me that he kind of got it, he knew it, but it's not in the book. He kind of, he didn't want, yeah, so he maybe felt bad for this family or whatever. So there were many secrets. I don't know if the family knows, if the filmmaker knew it. And again, but it's, to the filmmakers, it's much more important and interesting, the love story that may or may have not happened with the yeshiva bocher when he was 16, than the actual life he had with this person in Italy. It's more of a romantic story.
Yeah.
So things like that always come up with Waszyński. Crazy stories, really.
I wonder about, does any of this impact how you read the film itself, the original, the Dybbuk film, this dynamic? Does it give you any insight into, does knowing about Waszyński give you insight into how you understand the film and the choices that were made in it?
I As I said, I wrote the article about the Dybbuk, the film, already in 2010, and already then I wasn't the first one. People noticed that I didn't know that Waszyński was gay. I did read Gabriela Safran's biography of Ansky, and he was a closeted gay person too. She hints at that. It's as far as we can tell, there, yeah, she uses terms like, I don't know, yeah, trouble, sexuality or whatnot. But that's so already then, so it makes sense to read the Dybbuk as a love story between, two men. They're yeshiva bochas, they fall in love. The only way they can have a child together is if they marry, they swear to marry their offspring to each other. So I think it's really like, it's not just project. There were people who were interested in this kind of these love stories 100 years ago, with Ansky and again in Waszyński's term. When you watch the film, it's also very clear that Waszyński, that the love story between the men is really the whole first 30 minutes of it really becomes stronger and more powerful. So it just gives it another layer, but it's you really don't need even to know all that to feel it. I think it's there in the play and definitely in the film.
Do you see that kind of also in the love story between, Leia and Thanen? That this is a kind of a non-normative, or is it really between the two fathers only?
Yeah, the Dybbuk, that I think is part of why it's so interesting and intriguing. We keep talking about the Dybbuk and different kinds of remakes, ballet and opera and puppetry and whatnot, is because there's so many ways we can interpret this symbol. Is it like a woman who's it can be like a feminist reading of like the only way a woman can, and free herself from the chains of patriarchy. It can be also sexual, like heterosexual, like in terms of like the only way Hanan can penetrate her body. So it's a very sexual metaphor. It can be very spiritual. It can be also homosexual because she speaks in his voice. So it's a kind of a queer act. I think it's so rich and suggestive that it's really wonderful. You can take it in different directions, and I think they're all there. Again, I don't think it's just that we project crazy 21st ideas or whatnot. It's just this rich symbol, metaphor.
Do you have any other observations about the way that the film was adapted from the play and is a bit different? I mean, one thing, I don't know if it might be outside the scope of your work, but that I'm always curious about is the wonderful Henoch Cohn music, which is different and newly composed from the music that Joel Engel had written for the Habima production, but is wonderfully evocative. And yeah, so I don't know if you have anything to share about that, or about other elements of the film adaptation.
The film is I actually, again, I that article was on the film. On this talk was on the new documentary, but I did publish, so I did research quite a lot, and it was interesting because everybody awaited this film, because people outside the Yiddish world, outside the Jewish world, there was, if you click like today, Google New York Times Dybbuk review, you hit Frank Nugent review of the New York Times in 1938 when it came to New York. So it got the New York Times review. Everybody heard about, and there's also like a Nazi review. So in the 30s, so everybody really outside the Jewish world were waiting for this film, because everybody had already heard about the Dybbuk, and that comes to Henoch, that he knew that he felt. I found like film excerpts when they interview him before. There's like the making of the Dybbuk. It was a big thing in Yiddish press, in Yiddish in Poland, and they're saying things like Henoch is talking about how there's this burden of like some he knows that the Dybbuk will be the way that people outside the Jewish world will be seeing Yiddish or Jewish culture, and this is the 30s when not a good time for Jews. So he really felt, you know, the burden, and he tried to do his best with this, like creating a Jewish, yeah, significant. So I'm glad you liked it.
Wonderful. Well, unless we have any other questions from the audience, I think this might be a good place to stop. Zavid, thank you so much. This was really wonderful.
Thank you for coming. So what do we do? You can send me the the questions, and or I can, maybe I'll take a few minutes to answer a little in the chat.
I think we've touched on everything. There's some more things in the chat that just have come in that we've been talking about. There's a question here. Was there any newspaper interviews with the director, with Waszyński? I presume there must have been at that time.
Yeah. Oh, not too many. He
No?
was, no, he didn't like that kind of
Oh, okay. So that adds to the enigma around it.
Okay. Thank you.
Lots of thank yous are coming in the chat. And just for those folks that are out there with us, I just want to say that we have a few more of these talks coming up. Tuesdays are in English and Thursdays are in Yiddish, so I hope you'll join us again. And thank you all so much for coming.